Marie, welcome to Culture Camp.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
So we've got a really important topic today around the menopause. So let's start off with what is the menopause, Marie?
Can we start again, actually,
Yeah.
Kerry? So I've just realised because I've not updated my name badge and I just want to change that.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
I'll just stop.
Getting my camera right.
Marie, welcome to Culture Camp.
Thank you, Kerry. It's lovely to be here.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about your organisation and the topic that we're talking about today, which is the menopause?
Brilliant, of course. So my name's Marie, obviously, and I'm the founder director of the Wellness Project, CIC. And we kind of run on a bit of a Robin Hood model. So we go out into the private and commercial sector, delivering our training on mental health awareness and menopause. And we use some of the funds for that to do work in the community around well-being. So yoga, health walks, as well as the mental health awareness courses and menopause awareness courses.
Great. So let's just start with the very basics. What is the menopause?
So we can split menopause into three different stages. So we have perimenopause, we have menopause itself, and then everything else which is postmenopause. So perimenopause is the time when a woman's hormones are declining as she comes to the end of her reproductive kind of part of her life. And it's often where most of the symptoms of menopause happen. So the average length of perimenopause is about 4 years, but it can be much shorter or much longer. And during that time, hormones are just going like this, going absolutely crazy, especially estrogen, which causes many of the symptoms that people have around menopause.
Yeah.
Menopause itself is just the moment where, we say someone's reached menopause when they're 12 months after their last menstrual period. And it's
Okay.
just a moment in time. And this is the time where we can say, right, okay, that has now stopped. You're no longer producing eggs. You're no longer in a monthly cycle. And everything else is postmenopause.
Okay.
So just to give you a little bit more on that, menopause used to be either not talked about or seen as the beginning of the long, slow decline to death. And there's so many women that I talk about who see it in that way. And I just want to reassure people, regardless of all the symptoms people hear about, it's not how it has to be at all. So the average age of menopause, of reaching menopause in the UK is 51. It can be much younger and it can be much older. So we live like half of our adult life post menopause. So it's kind of important to know that as well.
So I think that's really interesting, that perimenopause stage is where the symptoms are. And actually the menopause is just that short window when things stop hormonally or change hormonally. I used to hear about, people being menopausal. So I guess that makes it sound like it's this long drawn out kind of period, but actually that perimenopause is when those symptoms happen.
They can also happen post-menopause as well. But for the majority of women, most of the symptoms happen before they reach menopause, which is when their hormones are doing all this kind of crazy up and down business.
So what's
that
the symptoms? What are we talking about here?
Oh, well, the main one is hot flushes. The main one is hot flushes. 75% of women experience hot flushes, and that means 25% don't. And that can range from just, but a hot flush is not just feeling a bit hot, it's like a wave of heat that sometimes is accompanied by sweating and sometimes not. And it can be really, I'm not saying distressing. It can be distressing, but it can just be a little bit overwhelming. And for some women, they might just have the odd one, and for others, it can be happening several times a day and through the night as well.
Sure.
Other main symptoms, and there are 34 symptoms.
Okay.
So I'm not going to go through them all. But other common ones are brain fog, forgetfulness, lack of concentration, joint pain, feelings of anxiety, sleeping kind of changing. But it is worth having a look at the full list, and we will kind of make sure you've got access to that kind of full list of symptoms. Because I know when I went into menopause, I had no idea that a lot of the things that were happening to me were associated with menopause. So
Mm,
it's just important to have that knowledge as
yeah.
such.
And so if those some of those symptoms like brain fog or kind of the emotional side of things, I can see how those would impact a woman at work. But what are the kind of bigger implications of menopause? Why do we need to consider it when we're creating work cultures?
Because so the age group of women that are in menopause are the fastest growing demographic in the workplace. Yeah,
Okay.
fastest growing, and 25% of the British workforce will be in that demographic by the year 2030, and even
Wow.
more so in the voluntary sector.
Okay.
Now, 10% of women leave their jobs because of menopause, and
Wow.
35% of women, yeah, 35% of women consider leaving their jobs through
And is that
menopause.
because why do you think that is?
There seems to be two things. One is managing the symptoms can
Okay.
be quite difficult in the workplace, and the other thing that often comes with that is a loss of confidence.
Mm.
So, especially if people really don't understand what's happening.
Hmm.
So if you can imagine that, I mean, you know, you've been somebody who's always been able to juggle multiple things, had boundless
Yeah.
energy, um, and then all of a sudden you start realizing actually you're struggling to remember everything or keep a grip of everything,
Mm.
and that's then accompanied with these sort of very public kind of hot flushes and feelings of anxiety and not
Sure.
getting much sleep, then it can really impact on your work life. What
Mm.
we know, and all these stats that I'm rolling out are from a study done by the Fawcett Society in 2020, is
Okay.
that only 22% of women actually tell their employer that they're sort of struggling
Okay.
with menopause. Um, so there's a lot of kind of shame, there's a lot of kind of stigma around
Hmm.
menopause and people
Hmm.
not feeling like they're able to tell people. So it's
Yeah.
really important for workplaces that they 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 very publicly talk
Hmm.
about menopause and being a
Yeah.
menopause friendly workplace. So women feel comfortable in talking about menopause and asking that for the support that they may need during
Hmm.
that time.
And with that support, presumably they can stay on at work, progress in the workplace. Um,
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I really welcome all the recent publicity about menopause. The narrative is a bit doom and gloom,
okay.
and I may have started like
Let's
this interview
counteract
like
that
that as
then
well.
in
Yeah,
this conversation. Let's hear some
because
positives. What's the
well,
positives of
sort of
menopause?
just like to change the narrative about it completely because
Mm,
I think that a lot of the problems women face during the menopause is not having the right information.
sure.
So not really understanding what's happening to them and why it's happening to them,
Hmm.
not understanding then what support they need and what help they can have.
Hmm.
Also, that is accompanied by general lack of awareness in society around them about menopause, and that includes the medical
Sure.
establishment as well. I really firmly believe with the right information and the right support, although it can be kind of it's a transition, so it's going to be a bit up and
Mm,
down. It is a time where women can thrive, where it
okay.
can be a really positive thing in a woman's life. And certainly, despite the difficulties I had, which I did have quite a few, um, when I look back on that journey, it's something that I see as a real positive. And I've
Mm,
definitely come out the other side more full of energy than I've been for a long while, really positive about life, more confident, and just a more understanding of who I am and my place in the world.
yeah.
So, and lots of women do report that, and you don't have to deal with periods, which is
Yeah.
just amazing.
Yeah. And I've heard that there's a kind of, so just to share a little bit about
Mm.
my situation. So I have endometriosis and I'm on a medical menopause injection at the moment called Prostat. And I've done lots of reading around the menopause. I don't think there's a lot of information out there for women in my position. Um, but one of the really encouraging things that I've read is around the sort of resilience and the, being really clear around what's okay for you and what's not okay for you, and being able to advocate for yourself, and just that kind of inner confidence that seems to come in a woman as you get older and potentially postmenopausal. Um, so yeah, I found that quite encouraging to read.
And from my perspective, that's definitely been true. And having spoken to other women in my kind of situation, post
Mm,
menopause, they definitely report that feeling of, well, actually, no, I know where I am in the world. I know now
yeah,
my place in the world, and I've just got more confidence to articulate that.
yeah. And what an
Um,
asset to a workplace, to an organization to be full of women in that
yeah,
position.
absolutely, absolutely,
So
indeed. Mm.
how can we make these menopause friendly workplaces? What helps?
So there's a few things. So I think employers, first of all, need to be very public in their advocacy for
Hmm.
women that are going through menopause and their articulation of their support. So that includes developing a menopause policy. It
Okay.
also that links into all our other policies. Perhaps holding kind of a little awareness raising campaign once a year, maybe a couple of times a year.
Yeah.
So World Menopause Day or International Women's Week, which
Hmm.
conveniently in kind of March and then October. So that's your twice a
Right.
year.
Yeah.
Um, I think all managers should have training in menopause.
Hmm.
Um, just what menopause is, but also how to hold conversations about menopause and how to support people.
Sure.
Um, One of the things that I'm going to be running in the future is some menopause champions training,
Brilliant.
and that is where workplaces can have somebody that has had a longer training, so they can become a little bit more expert in what menopause is and how to
Hmm.
support women and managers in the workplace around menopause. So a little bit like when you
Hmm.
have a first aider or a mental health
Sure.
first aider, you'll have a menopause champion or a menopause
Yeah.
ambassador. Um, and I think that it's also about that thing about workplaces really valuing the
Mm,
more senior and experienced staff and valuing um, that expertise and that knowledge in the workplace.
yeah.
So seeing it as a worthwhile thing to support women through this
Mm,
particular stage. Um, I do just want to also say though, employers shouldn't make assumptions about who's going through menopause
sure.
because like yourself, the circumstances you've just
Hmm.
named, but 1 in 100 women go through menopause before they reach the age of 40.
Okay.
People can have a surgical menopause if they've had a hysterectomy.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, you will find that if people have had breast cancer, they're often on medication that also puts them into
Mm,
menopause-like situation to reduce their estrogen.
hmm.
Um, Trans men will go through menopause as well, either through
Hmm.
hysterectomy or through that biological process. And I
Yeah.
think it's just really important to mention that because I think if it's a difficult and lonely place for women to be, how
Hmm.
much more, how much more difficult might it be if you're a trans man
Sure.
to talk about menopause
Yeah.
um, as well. So I think it's always worth
Yeah.
mentioning that. So it's the awareness raising. For women themselves that are going through menopause, what I say is you need to equip yourself. So
Okay.
you need to not understand what menopause is and know what the treatments are. And there's a couple of resources I'm going to recommend. One is
Hmm.
the NICE guidelines on HRT, hormone
Okay.
replacement therapy. So know what that is and know if that's appropriate for you, because
Yeah.
GPs don't often
Hmm.
understand what's available. And the other one is a fabulous app called the Balance app, which
Balance
is
up.
the Balance app, which is Dr. Louise Newsom, who's a real expert on menopause, that does
Mm.
some fabulous work about menopause symptoms. Not everyone can go on HRT. Not everyone wants to go on
Yeah.
HRT. Um, it is very low risk HRT, but it's not for everybody. There are
Hmm.
lots of things people can do in terms of exercise, diet,
Sure.
um, mindset, and a limited amount of complementary stuff that can help
Mm.
with menopause symptoms. Um, do read into it because there's an awful lot of people making a lot of money out of women at the moment by calling everything Meno on
Okay.
products
Yeah.
that actually aren't really helping.
Sure.
So yeah, so those are the main things.
Hmm.
In terms of employers, I think it's important to reiterate that menopause also can fall under the Equality Act, and it
Yeah.
can fall under disability, sex or age discrimination.
Okay.
So
That
with that in
spans
mind,
those three different categories.
yeah, it does,
Mm.
and depending on the circumstance of the individual and what has happened in the workplace.
Yeah.
So employers need to make reasonable adjustments for people. Um, and make it clear that if people are struggling with symptoms, they can have time off on sick for those symptoms
Yeah.
as well. But even just things like flexible working arrangements, hours-wise,
Yeah.
um, allowing people having some like period products in the workplace,
Mhm.
access to fans,
Mhm.
sort of temporary kind of rejigging of people's job, so to make it easier for them to manage symptoms when the workplace. All those kind of little adjustments, whole has to be very individual, can actually make
Mhm.
it really support women to
Yeah.
stay in the workplace.
Yeah, and I love those kind of practical tips and the legal side of things as well. But I also love the that you mentioned before about valuing the experience within your workplace, because that's a bit of a culture shift, isn't it? That's a bit of a change of lens.
Yeah.
Often, when we're valuing new projects, and funders and commissioners force us to value the new, as well as think about the experience. And I think potentially this is a great way of retaining the experienced workforce that you've hopefully developed and cultivated within your organization. So I'm sure there's an impact on recruitment and retention as well.
So there's just two more things I quickly want to mention, and these
Yeah.
resources. So at the moment, so Minding GM,
Hmm.
who I do a lot of work with, are rolling out some workplace menopause training for managers and for anyone who's employed in a small to medium enterprise, which includes the voluntary sector.
Right.
And so if you go on the Minding GM website, there's some free online trainings going on at the moment that people can sign up to. So
Fantastic.
that's the Minding GM stuff. The other thing is that the Wellness Project, the project
Mhm.
that I'm director of, we have some funding to do some bespoke menopause awareness stuff for voluntary sector organisations in Bury, Salford, and Bolton.
Great.
So within that, we can actually come in and help people develop menopause policies. We can deliver training within the workplace for service users as well as staff
Mhm.
teams. And
Mhm.
like I say, we're going to be running some of these menopause champions courses as well. So
Fantastic.
there's a few avid. There's no excuse for organisations not to get on board
Yeah.
with this. I know it's a time thing for people,
Mhm.
but the resource and help is out there.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you, Marie. It's been really interesting delving into this topic with you. And we will put your resources within the Culture Camp workbook and put a link to that below this video.
Brilliant.
Lovely.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you
very
so
much,
much.
Karen. Thanks.
Take care. Bye bye.